Hello, thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate your time today. We're here for a brief discussion on regulations and compliance and what companies can expect under the new Biden administration. Our guest, Mark Sabat, the Chief Executive Officer of Predictive Compliance, and Brian Hendricks, a partner with Husch Blackwell, are both going to be joining us today and providing insights on the upcoming compliance enforcement priorities and strategies. And we'll talk a little about what to expect, how COVID-19 can continue to be a factor, and what your priorities should be for 2021. With that, Mark, I will hand that off to you.
Thanks very much, Heidi, and welcome, Brian. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too, Mark.
It's been a while. I know that everybody's interested in trying to figure out what's going on at MSHA, and I want Brian to address some of that right at the beginning. But before we go too far, I want to let everybody know that one of the questions we always get right at the beginning is, do we know who the new assistant secretary is going to be? And do we have one yet? The answer is we don't have one yet. And I have a couple of names of people who I guess are under consideration. I'm sure Brian has heard some stuff about it as well. But just as a historical fact, there has never, the earliest an assistant secretary has ever been appointed after a change of administration has been May. So if we were to get an assistant secretary anytime in the next 2 months, it would be record fast, which I know in government terms, that is record fast. Generally speaking, they've been appointed in the mid to late fall, like September to November. So I'm pretty certain that there won't be anybody until at least sometime after July. But Brian, have you heard what names have you heard?
So probably the same that you have heard. I've heard that they are considering a couple of candidates. One who was previously at California OSHA as kind of a consolation for not getting the head of OSHA job. So perhaps they'll offer that person the head of MSHA as a consolation. The name that seems to be coming up over and over again has, I think, well, long story short, no. Same names that you've been hearing, and I don't think that anyone at this point can say with any certainty who it's going to be. Let's put it that way.
The other name I've heard is the former chief administrative law judge, Robert Lesnick, and I can let Brian weigh in on this because he's not a judge anymore, so we don't have to be nice to him. In my judgment, he would be probably the bottom of my list for somebody to be head of MSHA, but when he was the chief administrative law judge, he fairly openly displayed some issues where he was leaning against industry, I thought, and he's not a stupid guy, and I'd hate to see somebody with as much ability as he has with the position he's got in that job. We've had a couple like that in the past, so and the industry's always managed to muddle through, but that's where we are.
Mark, you're on the short list, right?
Oh, yeah, right. No.
No, I think Judge Lesnick is the one that I keep hearing the most. I've heard a couple of former MSHA career folks who have since retired. Tony Opegard's name is always in the mix. I think the most credible right now is Lesnick. And I understand that the union is very much in support, the unions, plural, the mine workers are very much in support of Lesnick. I just agree with Mark that it's too early to say, and I wouldn't say that Lesnick is the candidate at this point.
Yep. If I can remind everybody back to 2016 or 2017, the National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association had a candidate named Ed Elliott, who I think most of us thought would be getting the job. All of the reports were that he was being well considered and he would be a good candidate and people really liked him and all of that kind of stuff. He's former safety director at Rogers Group. At the last minute, they nominated the guy we got, who's Dave Zetezelo. What I understand is that Dave Zetezelo was the National Mining Association's nominee. And he was the National Mining Association's nominee because Bob Murray, the late Bob Murray, was a large contributor to the Trump campaign and told NMA that that was who they would put forward as a nominee. And the fact is, for everybody who's listening, that really what's going on here is all about politics. And the question is going to be who has the kind of political support that is most valuable to the administration, right, in order to get this done. So if the administration thinks that union endorsements mean the most, that'll take precedence. If the administration thinks that for a whole lot of administrative reasons, appointing the head of Cal OSHA as the new head of MSHA would be, it gets them a political advantage. That's what it's going to be. So please don't anyone delude themselves into thinking it has to do with who would do the best job. It always has to do with politically who's gonna be the most expedient or beneficial to the administration in power. So that's how that always happens. I was just on a call a minute ago where people were talking about whether or not, just to switch the subject, unless you want to talk about this more, Brian.
No, the only thing that I would add is more in the form of a question to you, Mark, is how much do you think it matters in terms of the direction the agency takes in their enforcement? You've been in this business longer than I have, and you've seen a lot of changes of administrations. And I can recall when the administration first changed, my first change of administration in DC, and I came into your office and asked you, okay, well, gosh, at that point it was, I think Bush. It was changing Clinton, Bush. And my question to you was, wow, is our practice going to change significantly? And your response to me was, nope. There'll be less regulation, same amount of enforcement, if not more enforcement. And I was skeptical at the time, but that was my experience. You were correct. And so I'd be curious to hear if you continue to think that is what we're likely to see with this change in political leadership.
I think we're not likely to see a huge change in terms of enforcement. I will, by the way, for anybody who reads Coalage, the latest Coalage has an article that we did from Predictive Compliance examining all the last 20 years of enforcement statistics. I don't know if you read it, Brian, but I'll send it to you.
Great, it really is.
And so I'll send it to you. And if anybody else wants it, I'm more than happy to send it to them. Just ask Heidi or send me an email. My email's in the stuff here. But what it showed is that the amount of citations in the last 4 years, actually the last 3, because I'm just so far behind, we couldn't use 2020. But the amount of citations that were issued in the first 3 years of the Trump administration were actually larger. They actually grew during that period than under the Obama administration. So there was a steady decline in the number of citations being written, which far outstripped the decline in the number of mines. The number of coal mines has dropped to almost half. So when you take that into account, you got to account for that. But the number of citations has dropped faster than the number of mines since 2008, right after UBB. But they started bouncing back up again in 2017. Not by a lot, but they did. The big difference, I think, is here that generally Democratic administrations are more likely to want to promulgate rules than Republican administrations are. So
the old saw is Republicans. The old saw is Republicans enforce, Democrats regulate. Right now, that's not how it holds out. But I think that you are correct in that enforcement's going to be the same, if not worse. But now we're going to see a bunch of new rules, and I think you're right about that.
I think we're going to see some new rules. I also think, and I'd like to push it back to you, Brian, for what rules you think we're going to see. But before
Sure.
I do that, I also think that given Joe Biden's views on organized labor and his political debt to organized labor, it is likely that we will see an increase in Section 105 discrimination complaints, in MSHA taking more and more of them to temporary reinstatement, to actually moving forward with them than we saw in the prior administration. I think there is, there's kind of I can use the term trickle down. There's a little bit of trickle down from when you see the assistant secretary who's skeptical of these minor discrimination complaints. The field enforcement tends to be less enthusiastic about bringing them. When you have an assistant secretary who's kind of bought into the whole thing lock, stock, and barrel, that the biggest problem we have is that operators are punishing minors who believe in safety, then it tends to blossom up.
Yes.
I mean, the guys at the field level, they don't take well the policy direction to start with, and but they feel the atmosphere, and the atmosphere in this administration, I expect to be much more sympathetic to that than I do was in the prior administration. So I think we can see some increase in that. And I've heard some people say it's already happened. One more little thing before I push it to you about rules. There is an acting assistant secretary. Her name is Jeanette Galanis. And Jeanette Galanis's qualifications to be at MSHA is that she was the chief of staff for Joe Main for 1 year, back during the Joe Main years.
You may want to say who Joe Main is, Mark.
Joe Main was the prior assistant secretary under the Obama administration for 8 years. And he came from the United Mine Workers. He was the retired safety director of the UMWA. So she was his chief of staff for 1 year. She's from Denver, which is where I live. And I think I know some people who know her, but I haven't actually pursued that yet. Trying to figure out more about her. But one of her former employees was the AFL-CIO. And when she left the Obama administration, she worked as a consultant to organized labor and to labor organizing groups here in Denver. So clearly her qualifications come from her union background and not a coal background or mining background, but a organized labor background. So that's part of where we are. For those of you, I don't know if any of you listening today were on the stakeholder call about COVID, but somebody brought up the fact that a lot of miners are refusing to be vaccinated or declining to be vaccinated. And she acted very surprised about that and really unprepared to answer a question about whether MSHA was willing to try and join a movement to encourage people to be vaccinated, miners to be vaccinated. And my thought is that there was some speculation in the call I was on just a minute ago that she's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. The unions want to see regulation of operators about COVID, but are reticent to push their members to do anything because their view always has been that management is responsible for all of this. And no individual employers should be held accountable for any of their own actions. So she seemed completely unprepared and totally surprised by the fact that there's a fairly higher than otherwise in the normal population rate of vaccine rejection in the mining community. So I think that's an example of what we're going to be dealing with for the next 4 years at least. Brian, if you can want to talk about what might be coming down at us.
Sure. And to start, let's just stick with COVID for a second. The big question right now is whether OSHA and MSHA will issue an emergency temporary standard on COVID. And I agree with Mark. I think that it is very unlikely at this point in the short term we'll see an emergency temporary standard on COVID from MSHA. The tea leaves are a little bit harder to read on the OSHA side. My understanding is that there is an emergency temporary standard that has been drafted by OSHA that is awaiting review or is being reviewed by the White House, and that we may see that in the next week or two. I think that would be ill-timed. I think it would be a mistake by OSHA to go that route, but I haven't seen the rule and don't know what it looks like. The concern there is it will look more like the California emergency temporary standard or rather than the Virginia standard. For MSHA, though, I think that the current leadership at MSHA, which is one political appointee and Pat Sylvie, I think that, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Pat knows MSHA inside and out. I think their inclination at this point is that the industry has handled the pandemic well, that there isn't a need for an emergency temporary standard, and that an emergency temporary standard at this point would be very difficult to implement given the differences in the types of mines that MSHA has authority to regulate. The concerns of a large copper mine with regard to COVID and the pandemic are different than the concerns from an underground coal mine. And the way that they deal with those concerns differ quite a lot, or mitigate the risk associated with the pandemic. Most importantly, and this is, I think, literally the reason that MSHA believes this, I hope it is at least, is that the industry has done a fantastic job of dealing with the pandemic. They were quick to react to it. They were quick to implement the measures and to follow CDC guidance. And consequently, the problems that we've had, I believe, have been fairly limited as compared certainly to other industries. So there's also, I've talked to several inspectors about this. They have no desire to be public health officials. I believe that the inspector at MSHA's inspector does not want to be in the business of enforcing pandemic-related rules any more than they absolutely have to. So I don't think we'll see that rule out of MSHA in the short term. They may be forced by the administration to issue one, or the new leader at MSHA, the new leader of MSHA may come in with the idea of promulgating that rule, an emergency temporary standard. But at least in the next several weeks, I don't expect to see one. I do expect to see in the next year a silica rule. I think that everybody believes that that is likely, and that we're likely to see that as one of the first significant regulatory actions taken by the new leadership at MSHA, regardless of who that is. A rule's been written, it is there. There are any number of considerations for what that rule will look like, but I think it is very safe to assume that we're going to see MSHA promulgate a silica rule, and the PEL for exposure is going to be set at 50. I don't know if they're going to adopt an action level. I don't know if they're going to take a table one approach like OSHA has taken with its silica rule. But my guess, if I had to bet, I would bet on a silica rule within the first year and a half of the administration. Mark, you want to say something about silica and health?
The only thing I want to say about silica rule is I think that's right on. I think that's exactly where we stand now. People are anticipating that rule. And the issue of a table one, I think, is going to be super important. And importantly for us, MSHA, unlike OSHA, MSHA has never allowed PPE as a means of compliance. And you have to go, even for noise and noise especially, you have to go through a whole process to get, you have to exhaust all your engineering control options before MSHA will certify that you can use PPE to achieve what you need to achieve. So I think table one is going to be extraordinarily important. And I think the one thing I will urge, which I've urged for years and years and years and years, is, okay, so your local Stone Association is going to comment, and the NSSGA is going to comment, and the National Mining Association is going to comment. I urge you all to read the rule, and even if it means copying some of your state association's comments, sending your own comments in. It really, these agencies often say, well, we got 800 comments on this and we only got 4 comments on that. Well, the 800 comments were from members of some organization, right? That copied the same one and sent in a pre-printed postcard. And the 4 comments on the industry side were one from NMA and one from NSSGA. So you're really talking about comments on behalf of thousands of operators. But unless we start to do that at a grassroots level, I really think we'll get steamrolled on everything. And it will hurt our chances of challenging the rule if we need to challenge it down the road. So it's just my exhortation to get involved in this and not rely. Love your associations, do stuff, join them, be active, but also do your own thing.
That's right. And there doesn't need to be anything special about the comments. There's no special form. It simply is a letter in the form of a comment to MSHA about what you see in the rule that is good or bad or both. Right. So there isn't any magic to these comments. If you have a concern about a proposed rule, raise that concern, comment on that concern. So I think is first and foremost. Go ahead, Mark.
I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but Brian, I know that this administration started to explore a rule about powered haulage.
Yes, that's where
it didn't get done. And that's probably the worst news of all, is that the process has started and now these new guys got it. So I'm curious what you know or have heard about where the agency might go on powered haulage.
I was surprised they didn't get the powered haulage rule out before the administration changed, because I know that they were very far along with that rule. In that I think they would have had a fair amount, depending on what the rule looked like, of buy-in from the industry on that rule. To the extent that the new administration sees it as tainted by the prior administration as not going too far, I think they'll pull back and reprioritize. I don't think they will share the same priorities or see powered haulage as a priority, at quite like Zatozalo did. Zatozalo truly believed that with enough technology, that all of these powered haulage accidents should be prevented with technology. And I think that it was an eye-opening experience for the agency as they considered the issues or the problems that they were trying to address, to realize that while technology can certainly take us farther than we've come, that it was not simply a fix that would apply across the board in a simple way. It was going to be difficult, time-consuming, and quite varied in the application to get what it was that the agency wanted there. So I think that there's an even, I guess, 70-30 against a powered haulage rule in the next year, although it could be that they push it out because it's ready to go. I just feel like they won't see it as going far enough. And I think that they know that silica is going to be a heavy lift. It's going to require a lot of political capital, and they're going to want to get that out the door. So I think silica, first and foremost, that's the health issue. Powered haulage, though, is something that they're interested in. I could see them easily looking at requiring proximity monitoring, and not just in coal, but also in metal, non-metal. Proximity monitoring, I think, is something that this administration might be more interested in pushing or requiring. I don't think that this administration will be nearly as concerned or interested in the economic analysis, the economic cost benefit of the various rules that they may have on their agenda. And for that reason, I think it will be easier for them internally to justify or to think that rules are justified, like a powered haulage rule that would require across the board proximity monitoring.
I think we're close to being through with our allotted time, right?
Yes, we've got just about 4 minutes left
Just
before the end of the
minutes.
Yep.
Right. And we haven't, I mean, we've talked a little bit about rules and a little bit about who the new assistant secretary might be, and a little bit about enforcement. And as I said at the beginning, if we got a new assistant secretary before May, it would be a record. I don't think anybody expects it. Also, I think with the head of Cal OSHA and Judge Lesnick, there would be some significant opposition to either of those appointments, and that tends to delay ratification and nomination proceedings and all that kind of stuff. There's always negotiations about it. So I'm thinking that won't happen for a while. And I also, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but if you differ, I don't think that major initiatives are going to get all ahead of steam behind them until there is an actual, real, honest to nominated assistant secretary.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's why we haven't, why we're seeing the holding action on ETS, although I think that is the right choice by MSHA and by MSHA's current leadership. They're doing the right thing on COVID right now. See, I can say very nice things about MSHA. But I do believe that their approach to COVID right now is the right approach for them. But you're right, we're not going to see anything big until then. And I do think, though, that this may be the first assistant secretary that we have for MSHA that isn't specifically from a coal background. We may get a metal on metal person, or slightly more likely, I think, unfortunately, someone who doesn't have any mining experience at all, or any real mining experience. And that would be genuinely disappointing.
It would be distressing. So
yes.
I think we're at the end. Appreciate everybody taking a little time to listen to us. I hope it was helpful. And if you have any questions, we have our chat boxes and question and answer boxes open.
One quick question that came up was that, do you see regulations or interpretations of things changing for OSHA as well? I know it's certainly a big discussion, but do you see anything out there that might be a big priority for them coming up?
Yes, a lot more enforcement. They have a budget for a lot more enforcement now. They were recently appropriated more money for enforcement in the short term, and you'll see some additional rulemaking. They've already got the big silica rule out the door in the Obama administration, but the short answer to that question is yes, more regulation, different regulation, and more enforcement.
Right. I also think you need to watch the DOL space, because joint employer and all the issues of who's the real employer and how much company responsibility, how deep into company structures people are going to reach for remedies is going to go back to what we had under the under the Obama administration. They're going to look farther and deeper into corporate structures for responsibility.
I agree with that. And I think that even further at the Department of Labor, in terms of priorities for this administration, changes in occupational safety and health, whether it be MSHA, OSHA, aren't in the top 5. I think that changes at National Labor Relations, changes in wage and hour laws, as Mark said, in joint employer definitions. I think that those are the priorities for this administration. That's not to say that they won't make it to the priorities that they have for occupational safety and health, but the big changes that this administration, the heaviest lifts, will be on wage and hour, NLRB, labor relations.
So I would watch that space very closely, just as Brian was mentioning. I will send that article, the Coolidge article, to Heidi. You have my email if you want it directly. Send it to Brian as well.
It's a great article.
I mean, everybody waits for their Coolidge every month. So I hope those, it's a kind of a nerdy statistical article, but I hope people find it interesting. Thanks very much for listening. Please,
thank you.
You have our emails. Send us any questions you have if you have any, and we're more than happy to talk to you. And I hope it was helpful.
Thank you to both of you. We appreciate your time, and we're glad you could join us today.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.